Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is the Sunday show on Hromadske International, the only prime-time TV program explaining the Eastern European geopolitical storm in English. Welcome to the new season of Hromadske International, and I'm Natalia Humanyuk.
On the territory of
Former Georgian President and former Odesa region governor Mikheil Saakashvili attempts to return to Ukraine. NATO and security. We speak with Ukraine's deputy foreign minister. A Ukrainian teenager went to meet a girl in Belarus and disappeared. Why his father believes he was kidnapped by Russia's security services. As the MPs return from vacations, President Petro Poroshenko addresses the parliament. What to expect in this new political season? And when bot attack? How to recognize a propaganda robot account on social media? Go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua to see full versions of our reports and interviews. Also follow our social networks, Twitter and Facebook. They are there 24/7. Search Hromadske International. And I'll be back in a second. Mikheil Saakashvili, the former governor of Odesa region and former president of Georgia, has managed to return to Ukraine. His supporters broke through the Ukrainian border and brought him across. In July, President Poroshenko stripped Saakashvili of his Ukrainian citizenship while he was in the United States. Since then, Saakashvili had traveled across Ukraine on his cancelled Ukrainian passport. Today, he attempted to re-enter the country on that document, but was denied entry. Hromadske spoke with several lawyers and officials. According to them, there is no simple procedure for handling a person with the Ukrainian passport, but who had been stripped of the citizenship. We also talked to Mr. Saakashvili earlier today. Here's what he said before.
If Poroshenko is not afraid of me, let him give me equal footing like it should be. I mean, it just doesn't look good. Looks like he's getting rid of political opponent, and no matter how many times he says that I'm not a danger of him, every action of his shows exactly the opposite, that he regards me as a grave and immediate danger. And I'm very sad that it turned out this way, because I never intended it to be this way. But anyway, if he initiated this process, and I have to stand up for legal rights, that's all.
12 hours ago, Saakashvili began his attempt to cross the border and was denied at every step on the way until now. So how did he end up on the Ukrainian territory? We'd like also to help you orient and what this day was about. There are a few checkpoints. You see here the Polish and the Ukrainian side. Krakovets on the Ukrainian. So it was supposed that Saakashvili would come by foot. He would come by the, not by the train. So with a group of the volunteer battalion members, MPs, and a few thousand people waiting him here. Yet he decided to go through a different checkpoint and use the train. The locomotive from Przemyśl had never made it to the Ukrainian territory. It had been stopped. So later Saakashvili had taken the bus and also tried to cross particularly this checkpoint. All the crowd from here had to move very fast. So really there was a lot of confusion. There were a lot of people together with Saakashvili. There was the Lviv mayor Sadovyi, former Ukrainian Prime Minister Tymoshenko. So finally Saakashvili excited Poland. He left Poland at the Medica border crossing. We would like you to show the photo of how it had happened. It happened just very recently. Hromadske correspondents are working there on the both sides of the border. And we are also in touch with a French journalist from Radio France International, Sébastien Gobert. He had spent this day following Saakashvili. So we would like to get into more details of this breaking story of today and of the breaking of the Ukrainian border by Saakashvili. As far as I understand, we do have issues to to get Sebastian online. So we would like to ask about what's going on. The complication is that all this crowd of foreign and Ukrainian reporters were trying to follow Mr. Saakashvili, first of all, on the Polish border, later on the Ukrainian border. That's exactly difficult. That's very difficult, in particular because there are a huge amount of people, and also, it's also about the documents. So the story is enrolling. We're still trying to get Sebastian on the line. We also for the whole day, Hromadske is in touch with his own correspondent, so we know the connection is poor. Skype or phone. Let's see what we have. So I see that Sebastian would join us in a couple of seconds. As far as I understand, he's just stayed on the Polish side, but till the last minutes was really following this procedure. Sebastian, thanks a lot for joining us. Really explain us what's going on. What is the last things you know?
Well, I mean, the last things I saw, it was already something like 30 minutes ago. I followed Saakashvili and hundreds of supporters on the Ukrainian side. Then I had to go back to the Polish side because, well, I mean, it's very stupid. But I had left my things back in the bus. So, I mean, the last thing I know is that the police actually let him go and that he's on his way to Ukraine. So apparently the first stop would be Lviv. And as you know, the mayor, Andrei Sadowy, is kind of a political opponent of President Poroshenko. So it's really possible that he's going to spend the night there and then reconsider for the strategies. Because no one knew what would happen today, and no one really knows what is going to happen now.
And Sebastian, so you talked to the people. What was the plan of Saakashvili? What he's going to do further? Of course, we will follow this story from the Ukrainian side. So far, there are no something urgent happening. So how organized was the whole thing? What the people should know after this complex and confusing day?
Well, the thing is that it was a bet, that's for sure, because no one really expected Saakashvili to be let in, or no one really expected that many demonstrators to show up and to break the cordon of the border guards. It was also what has to be remembered is that today was a very interesting PR operation, very interesting communication. Like Saakashvili had various invited politicians, invited journalists, and really keen on communicating and on giving some press briefings. So the thing is that it seems to me that he has planned his in a way or another, he has planned to continue his political involvement in Ukraine. And today actually shows that it is quite possible for him to do so.
Sebastian, so have you managed to talk to the people? Of course, there is both an opposition, there are people supporting him. You've been to a different side, but no, we do have a lot of people supporting him on the Ukrainian side as well. The Ukrainian, there are a lot of who oppose. So how it's seen from outside? Were there a lot of foreign press? So how in generally the whole issue is seen, if especially in a way how Ukraine managed to protect its border from one person, from one politician? I see the bit of the problems with the connection, so I'll try to repeat the question. I'll try to repeat the question as far as I understand that we would like to see how this situation is seen. We see that Sebastian is back online. We're sorry for the complexity, for the difficulties with connection, but please understand that we really are online with the correspondent on that particular very confusing part of the border where lots of things happening. So really, can you manage to observe the reaction and the actions of the Ukrainian border guards, of the officials, how they managed to handle this issue, where there was no simple answer?
Well, the thing is that, I mean, the Ukrainians actually handled it very, very bad. I mean, it really looked like a circus from the beginning to the end. It really looked like some kind of a farce. You know, the way that they kind of strengthened this security at the Krakovets border post, and then the way also that they didn't allow two trains to leave from the Przemysl train station just because Saakashvili was on board. So didn't even allow the train to get to the border proper. And then when we got to the border this evening, to this border post where I am now, I mean this blockade, this line of military men, of border guards. It looked like Donbass. It looked like a war zone. I mean, this was really not what you would expect.
Okay.
Of the border with the Schengen states, with the European Union.
Sebastian, thanks a lot. We hear that probably we've heard the main things will definitely will be on this story. You can go to our webpage, and there is the background information and all updated information, and we'll definitely follow this story after the show and during the show. So just follow the social networks and our news feed, and I will be back in a second. Since this autumn, when the Ukraine-EU association agreement came into force, the President had often mentioned EU and NATO accession as Ukraine's next goal. But what exactly must be done for this to happen? Also, Minsk agreement has long been considered to be a stalemate, yet it's still cherished by Ukraine and its international partners. This summer, Ukraine received a US special envoy on a Russian-Ukrainian negotiation, and there are many expectation of progress on the Donbass. There are a number of Normandy talks planned for September, and Ukraine will raise the issue of UN peacekeepers at the UN General Assembly meeting later this month. To address this issue, we have here now at the studio Deputy Foreign Minister Vadim Prystaiko. He is also had been appointed to be the Ukraine's NATO representative, so welcome.
Thank you.
But really, before we discuss NATO, all the questions we have prepared on that day, there is the news of the day, Saakashvili. So really, there is a lot of international attention, including from the partners. We really know that people are following from abroad, including decision makers, politicians. So will it harm the Ukrainian reputation? And really, we know that Mr. Saakashvili is a great performer, and somehow these kind of actions could be expected. So how happened that the government hadn't countered that didn't realize that would become a bit of the international scandal? You know, the Polish had to handle this issue. So what is your take on that?
I believe that any circus can harm the seriousness of the government, at least. That's what I fear. The problem with Saakashvili itself, so far it's been handled quite awkwardly, but at least nobody got hurt. That's the positive moment of this. How it will develop, that's a very interesting question. Will our partners react somehow to this? I believe they look at it sitting in the chairs, and some of them have popcorn already. I don't believe that it will have some serious consequences.
Okay, so do you think that it would be possible to handle it differently, knowing that, you know, if you strip these kind of the Mr. Saakashvili with not really clear legal explanation, you know, it's there, but we understand that even the lawyers we talked and even the migration service, till then they didn't know what really to do.
I agree, and Mr. Saakashvili also can handle it a bit more subtle than he did. I think that we can be prepared more and can see what would happen if we allow him to come to our borders. That's probably he is going to cross them. So the border authorities were ready, and the way they were preparing themselves, that was the choice was done because of the number of people who would go in from the Poland and into the Poland. So I believe so far they've been handling not very well, but at least managed the scandal.
Okay, so we'll follow, of course, that issue, all of us. But going to the topic of our interview on this talk, starting from the very, let's say, recent news on the UN, on the possibility of the UN peacekeepers. The president has spoken about that. I also would like my colleagues to show the quote of the president on, in particular, on the issue regarding the possibility of deploying the UN peacekeepers. So please let us hear that.
The Ukrainian side is ready for objective talks with the members of the UN Security Council. I believe that this discussion should include such fundamental elements. Firstly, we are in favor of deploying a fully fledged UN peacekeeping mission throughout the Donbass.
Can you clarify? That's a pretty new initiative, so there was a lot of talks, but later the Russian President Putin had come with a different initiative, and we understand that in order to make it happen, there should be an agreement in the Security Council. So really, what is the real plan to make it happen, not on the Russian condition, which I understand the Ukrainian government doesn't really accept, meaning that talking to the separatists, agreeing with them, deploying the troops on the just a separation line.
Yeah, I agree with you, but you actually asked for clarification. Sorry, it might take a bit of time, because President Poroshenko asked it in 2015, the peacekeeping, not now. It's not a new initiative, at least in our time. What we asked, that we wanted to have the peacekeeping, some sort of peacekeeping mission. We were ready to any sort of peacekeeping mission, just to let us have a peace and resolve the issues we have. What Mr. Putin is trying to do, he's just hijacking the initiative of President Poroshenko, but doing it as the elephant in a shop. Because what he asked, exactly what you mentioned, and there are other couple of things which won't be taken very well in Ukraine. I agree with you. What we ask is simple: to have the mission with mandate over the whole region occupied, and not for the protection of another international mission, of OSCE mission. That's just ridiculous.
So really, we understand that the issue was there for a while, but the new things happened. This issue had been raised by the president in his parliament address at the meeting with the U.S. State Defense Secretary Mattis. And as we know, the president is going to address that on the General Assembly later this month. So, in particular, what are the ways the Ukraine tries to get it? What is the argument for the Security Council, for the international partners? Otherwise, they would say, Russia is there, Russia in the Security Council, there is no much sense to discuss that. So how tangible is that in particular now?
That's because of the hybrid nature of the conflict itself. Because everybody understands Russia is in Security Council at the same time in Ukraine, right? But Russia is playing the role, and we are not there. So they don't have many of the arguments they would be able to come with, telling that we don't want to have. The best they had, just before President Putin said, that it is against the Minsk. That was the only line they had, and the only line they used to take. And this is just it's not for the international even argument.
We have finally, I think these are the, everybody were very positive about the appearance of Kurt Volker, who is the US Special Envoy, and there is some movement expected. We were told there would be a number of phone calls this month, and there would be a busy September. So really, what at this stage we are exactly waiting from our partners, or what are exactly the things we are trying to discuss with Russia? The Minsk agreement is a general thing, but what is the next step? What is on agenda?
First of all, happy to have Kurt with us now. He replaced Victoria Nuland, who used to be the ambassador of NATO, of United States to NATO. Both of them, they replaced one another. So this sort of NATO unity. I'm very happy as ambassador to NATO to be in this company as well. What we're expecting to have with Kurt, As you heard probably what he was already saying, that he is very deep in the coordination of the efforts. He met with Surkov recently. He was also openly talking about the lethal weapons, which we didn't have before during the previous administration, during the previous representative of U.S. government to the negotiations. So this gentleman is much more sort of pushy, if I may use this word. He is very active, he is well known in Ukraine, and he knows and understands Ukraine well.
Is the defense lethal weapon from the U.S. today the primary goal? That is something that Ukraine is expecting from the U.S. right now?
We have many parallel tracks. This is one of the tracks.
What else?
We want them to make a bit of political game as well. We want them to support the sanctions against Russia. We want them to support Ukraine, both politically and with our reforming efforts and everything else.
So really, if we speak about the sanctions, of course, this is the kind of a long-term goal. But so are we kind of satisfied with status quo, and just the most important is really to keep it as it is, that the sanctions are not pulled off? Or, where is the proactive, movement from the Ukrainian
The practical side, the application of the sanctions is that Russia understands that actually the whole West against what she is doing. It's not helping us, per se. It's not adding anything to our GDP, or it's not helping us to develop our economy. So we have to do this part ourselves. It's not helping to protect our soldiers and our people. We have to reform our army as well.
So I'm probably may sound also for the audience a bit repetitive, but what I'm also trying to get, that Ukraine is fighting the defense war, but it's kind of in the defense position. But what is a proactive position at this stage, especially in the time when a lot of people expect some of the, things happen, because, there are smaller things taking place, Minsk, but it looks like, people want more, some kind of a breakthrough, even if it won't happen, right away.
You are not repetitive, and you are not the only one. There are many schools of thoughts in Ukraine. One is saying that they are on our territory, it's now our land. We're not disputing anything with anybody. We have the full right to not just defend, but to clear out our land and have the peace and everything. The only problem is how to achieve it, and that's what we are trying to achieve as a government, as a president. And it's not that it's not that attractive. It's bloody. Sometimes it's dirty. It's not effective because we are doing it for 30 years in a row. That's why we are trying to introduce new things like peacekeeping, a renewed idea of peacekeeping. This, we believe, will allow us to move ahead with political reformation as well.
There are a lot of people not in the political elite in Ukraine who are not really supporting the Minsk agreement, Minsk Accord.
Tell me about it.
So what would be your also answer? And often our partners, international partners, are also here that Ukraine is not very much in favor of this particular, way of this particular solution.
Minsk is it's not fair, I have to tell you. I was the one who was negotiating from the very beginning. The technical part was done long time ago. And even at that time, we knew that what is that? It was unfortunately the only alternative we had. So it's not fair, and it served its purpose. Now we have to move further. At the same time, we are a responsible partner. As we told that we would going to have it, and we will hold to follow it, we will do it.
So this week you've met with the Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg. So what are results? What the people could expect from that? What is it take?
It's not like next month we are going to become a member of NATO, although we want to have this. We discussed things, and the Ukrainian way to NATO was discussed as well. But we also discussed many practical things, and especially the results of the last meeting in Ukraine and the last visit of NATO Atlantic Council to Ukraine.
So what are these next steps?
The next steps, what we want to achieve, we want to have the renewed cooperation in many spheres. First of all, the trust funds. The so-called CAP, the Comprehensive Assistance Package, next summit of NATO, the Enhanced Opportunity Program for Ukraine to become the enhanced partner of NATO. There are very, very practical things.
Okay, so I expect it will take some time to know, to see the results. So, Mr. Poroshenko, thanks a lot for coming and opening this new season of Hromadske International Sunday's show, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you.
19-year-old Ukrainian Pavlo Hryb departed the city of Chernihiv to spend an afternoon in Gomel, Belarus, with a girl he had met online. Then he disappeared. It happened 2 weeks ago. In the ensuing days, Pavlo's female friend came forward and told journalists that she had been blackmailed by Russian Federal Security Service into luring the young man to Belarus, where he could be detained. Last week, Pavlo resurfaced in a detention center in the Russian city of Krasnodar, held on terrorism charges. This despite that Pavlo had never fought in eastern Ukraine, he is young, couldn't serve in the army due to chronic disability and hadn't visited Russia. For more background on this story, check out our website. Hromadske sat down for an exclusive interview also with Pavlo's Hryb father, Igor, about the search for his son and the possible reasons for his disappearance.
I can only make one conclusion. It is not connected to any of my actions. It can only be related to Pavlo's posts on social media. What makes me think that? Because he has never been a member of the armed forces of Ukraine, any other military groups or public organizations, even book clubs. Starting in 2014, he actively posted on the Russian social network Vkontakte. I think that at that time or later on, the Russian security services came across his account because they found his comments or posts interesting and started surveilling him.
Did you question whether you should have let Pavlo go to Belarus?
Of course I did, of course. My wife and I had an argument with him prior to his departure, but our son didn't listen. He said, "I'm 19 years old, I'm an adult, and I have all the rights to go, and there isn't a way you can stop me." It's true, we can't constrain him, and he didn't listen to any of our arguments.
At the moment, Pavlo's whereabouts are unknown. The Ukrainian consul in Belarus says that Pavlo is not in Belarus. How are you planning to search for him?
We keep on searching according to the information we gathered about his trip and where hypothetically he could be at this moment. And we base our search on the fact that it was the FSB, the Federal Security Service, in the city of Sochi in Russia's Krasnodar Krai region who initiated the charge. Given that the pretrial jail that serves the FSB in Krasnodar Krai only exists in Krasnodar city itself, on 22 Krasnoarmeyskaya Street, Investigative Detention Center number 5, we have an inkling that that's where he is.
Did you try contacting Russian human rights activists, lawyers, people who monitor prisons and pre-trial detention centers?
I'm getting a lot of help from lawyers like Yevgenia Zakrevska and public human rights organizations. They are in touch with their Russian colleagues who have now joined them in handling this case. From my side, I sent a letter to the head of a human rights organization in Moscow, Svetlana Ganushkina, and asked her to join this process. She replied saying that she will make a plea regarding Pavlo to the head of the Human Rights Committee under the President of Russia.
You have seen the Skype correspondence between Pavlo and this girl, who he went to Belarus to meet. What surprised you the most in those conversations?
The only thing that was not related to a romantic conversation between two young people was the slogan "Glory to Ukraine" and its response, "Glory to the heroes." It was the way they greeted each other. That's the first point. Secondly, this girl wrote in very grammatically correct Ukrainian. There were no mistakes, and that's what caught my eye. Because even young people who live in Ukraine and study the Ukrainian language in school can make an occasional mistake. It really did catch my eye.
You said in a press conference that Pavlo has a medical diagnosis that poses certain threats to his health in detention. Could you please tell me about it, whatever you can disclose?
This is not a secret anymore. We've released the information already. Unfortunately, Pavlo has been disabled since childhood because of the Chernobyl catastrophe. It's a congenital defect inside his body that affects his organs. The diagnosis is called portal hypertension, and it has other complications. Pavlo requires regular medication, a certain daily regimen, and a special diet. Even if supposedly no one physically hurts him there, just his presence under the conditions that they have in detention, with no medications, a different diet from what he needs in order for his organs to properly function, and just the atmosphere there in general, you know what I mean, can lead to fatal consequences.
During the press conference, you also said that you suspect that Pavlo could have wound up in the anti-terrorist monitoring system designed in Russia in preparation for the Sochi Olympics. What made you think that?
I found out from the media that while preparing for the Sochi Olympics, the Russian security services in Krasnodar Krai installed special technical equipment to enforce the anti-terrorist program. This brand new equipment monitored social media, telephone conversations, and so on. And that was the year 2014 when the Euromaidan protests and the whole situation in Crimea and eastern Ukraine erupted. So he might have written something or reposted something somewhere, and the system caught that.
Are you considering going to Krasnodar Krai yourself?
From unofficial sources, I know that it is not recommended that I go to Krasnodar.
A new political season begins in Ukraine. President Poroshenko had made an annual address to the parliament. The speech is widely regarded as highlight the government's priorities for the next year, including the military, fighting corruption, and advancing reforms. Much of the speech was devoted to Russian aggression. But what we are supposed to expect this year, our two guests will explain. We have here Olena Shkarpova, who is the economic expert at Vox Ukraine, and your organization have fact-checked this almost 2-hour speech, and also Professor Oleksiy Harany, who is also a political analyst, to make a political assessment. So really, probably, Olena, we'd start with you. You've done this fact-checking. Really, what was this something to point out? To what extent the president, he mainly wasn't speaking about the plans, but about what had been achieved either by him. So what is your take?
I would say that the speech was quite good and adequate, but actually the president normally speaks pretty well in terms of facts. When you try to fact check, then almost all the facts are truthful. And when you find some manipulations or falsehood, then usually you pay very much attention to that, because it's not just, he cannot say anything unintentionally. I think he really understands what he says. And in this speech, he was right in many things, many economic things, but when it comes to the Supreme Court procedures, when the judges are chosen to the Supreme Court, then there was really high manipulation, I would say even false, that it wasn't true what he said. And again,
what he tried to sell, then.
Yeah, he said that the society and I don't know in English how it's called, it's Commission of Integrity or Council of Integrity. They're activists that are following the process of choosing the judges. He said that this process was that to 80% agreed with this council, but actually it was not. And there were many things that this council didn't agree, which means that president really manipulated in this field.
Professor Harany, so how have you read this speech? If we speak about more like a political statement for the government priorities, there were a lot about financial support of the military. There was something about the EU accessions. So from that, can we understand what the government and the president himself will do during the next political season?
Short answer is yes, we can. But first of all, I would like to react to what my colleague said, because I also checked the material which you prepared by your organization, and actually I found it very useful. Here it is, about more than 10 pages or something like that. And basically what you mentioned, which was a mistake, or you can call it how, untrue, not true or manipulation, actually this is only perhaps one example. There is also another example of some kind of manipulation, but that's it. All other points which were made by president, actually you said this is true. And that was very important for me, because I'm not an economist. So usually judging the economic things, I rely on what economists said. So actually for me it was a pleasant surprise that most what President said wasn't manipulation, what was actually the truth.
I would probably then, since we are into this issue, also would suggest to listen to this couple of quotes, in particularly on, I understand, on the GDP and on the Ukrainian international financial rates.
After 14 quarters of falling, GDP has already been growing for 6 straight quarters. And this, I emphasize, is despite the fact that the bulk of Ukraine's industrial potential is under occupation. Last week, Moody's agency raised Ukraine's credit rating. It is not the first nor the only agency coming to this conclusion. The other 2 most authoritative agencies did the same thing earlier. In July, I introduced a bill to abolish e-declarations for civic activists.
So, Professor Hromadske, so imagine you're an MP, a Ukrainian citizen, or, I don't know, a foreign diplomat who would like to understand where the country is heading and where the most important person in the country, and we understand the president has a lot of power and influence, is moving his country. What is your thoughts?
Well, I would say that, frankly speaking, I would say that perception of all these people, categories you mentioned, would be different. Yeah. Because if I am a foreign diplomat, I would say that this is quite balanced speech. And it's about achievements, but also about problems. And usually I would say that the estimation of Western experts is more positive than our Ukrainian perception of what's going on here, because we live in the country, so we feel all the difficulties. And experts, they are talking mostly from, I would say, comparative point of view, comparing Ukraine to other transitional countries or economies. And if we analyze from this perception, the country is moving with all the zigzags, but it's moving. If we are talking about MPs, definitely those MPs who are supporting president and the government, they would say, okay, everything is fine, while opposition deputies would say, no, everything is wrong. And common citizens, basically, I would say that mostly, unfortunately, they distrust authorities because they feel economic difficulties, and we have economic difficulties, and we have macroeconomic stabilization, but common people, they do not feel it, actually. They need to feel it from, in their pockets. So that's why all these perceptions would be different. I am, again, as political scientist, I would stick to the group number 1, expert community, which would say the country is moving forward with all the zigzags and problems, but nevertheless the trend is right.
So, Olena, of course, that is exactly your job to say. The president was more or less boasting. That's how I would rather read it, because he was saying about all the good things what government said, and the economy is growing, things are moving in IT sphere, in that sphere, so there is a bit of a progress. To what extent it is, I understand you fact-check the text, but if we are speaking the general situation, the kind of a positive assessment of the president of the situation of the economy, and the real kind of, your organization is also tracking the reforms. So is there any disproportion?
I wouldn't say there is disproportion, because the economy is really moving forward, and the Ukrainian economy is really recovering, but very slow, I would say. But nonetheless, there are many things to do, and for example, in this political season, the parliament will have to vote for land reform, pension reform, healthcare reform, or at least they have to start discussing them. And this means that these very sensitive things are not solved, and the president haven't mentioned them, as I remember. And it's really important to start moving forward in these fields.
No, actually, he mentioned all these problems, and
but not how to solve them.
But the question, actually, he said very important. He mentioned other problems as well, regarding corruption, regarding lifting, for example, MPs' immunity,
which won't take place with this parliament.
Yes, so he hopes that at least the present parliament would make a decision for future MPs. Okay, so so it would be possible to move forward here. So he was talking about that. But the problem is, again, how to reach all of these things, you know, how to build majority in the parliament in order to vote for this. What was important is that President said that he is not in favor of early elections and he will not let them happen. So basically this is a strong message, and we understand that it's not in the interest of President or the government to have these early elections. Moreover, I would say that this is not in our national interest because it would lead to destabilization, kind of, you know, unstable situation. Also, opposition would definitely say differently, because opposition would say, yes, we are in favor of pre-term elections.
Lena, and also there was another issue which I think kind of pretty important. It's about the e-declaration. I would suggest we listen first what President says.
In July, I introduced a bill to abolish e-declarations for civic activists. I ask you to support it. I am prepared to admit that these declarations were our collective mistake.
So that was the promise of the president, but really, is it the case? Because what we understand, there is something else in the...
Yes, there is something else, and actually he missed a lot of very important information in this case. He offers to abolish this norm of electronic declarations for anti-corruption activists, but at the same time he didn't say that the new law makes it very strict... yes, the bill. It makes it very strict financial reporting for this kind of organizations. And as far as I know, Human Rights Information Center, they are really against this future law. And so it's really a problem. And he didn't mention it.
The main thing here, because I belong to this category, which would, if it doesn't happen, so it would mean that I am also to submit electronic declaration like our MPs, which I do not consider to be just. So basically what President suggests to cancel this norm. So I will not do that, okay? But my organization or other organizations are to show it publicly. Basically, it's not the problem for organizations because anyway we are doing it for our tax administration. So everything is known to our tax administration.
Yes,
there's nothing new. But the problem would be to make it public. It would create some problems for
some
NGOs.
Pressure on these organizations.
Yeah.
You know, in this day, of course, there is. I would probably, very shortly ask you, so what you would see yourself, like 1, 2, 3, the priority, from as a citizen. So, what would be the priority? What do you expect this autumn from the parliament, from the president? Where to follow? What to follow? And especially judging from this speech, are these kind of the war agenda, peace agenda, economic agenda, anti-corruption agenda, economic agenda?
Well, I would say again, in general, the speech was good. The question is how to deliver it. And here we will face many, many difficulties. I think some of the reforms would be adopted. We saw actually that reform of education, the law on reform of education system has been adopted. Hopefully the pension reform would be adopted, which is not very popular, which would be a positive move. Regarding peace, I think in general, actually, the strategy here is right. The strategy is right because we understand that it would be almost impossible to see the military solution of the conflict, so we rely mostly on diplomatic efforts, and in this regard, one of the things which is now under discussion is the question of UN peacekeepers, which actually would be helpful for Ukraine if it's implemented.
That's what we discussed before with the Deputy Foreign Minister and Olena. So what are the reforms to follow, ending this segment?
To be honest, I'm not sure any reforms will be accepted in this by this parliament. because I just see, I'm sorry, I just see what the opposition is saying, and their rhetoric is getting worse and worse, and regarding the reforms that I mentioned. So their support is very low.
And at this day, when we are all following what's happening on the Ukrainian-Polish border, with Mr. Saakashvili crossing and breaking into the Ukrainian territory,
and breaking the law
in the Ukrainian territory. So, just being very brief, to what extent it would be the event, and what we can expect? How important is this for Ukraine, for Ukrainian political, fight which is taking place?
How much time do we have?
Little, very little. So how important is this story?
Well, I think actually we can analyze the roots. The roots are very contradictory of what happened. But basically what we now have seen at the border, I think this is a huge, it looks like a huge provocation from Saakashvili, and he doesn't care about Ukraine. I think he cares only about his political ratings. And unfortunately, he created the situation where Ukraine is losing. Not the power, not authorities or Poroshenko himself, but Ukraine is losing, because the question when the border can be crossed by force by a group of people, including politician or the person who pretend to be Ukrainian politician, this is a very dull for me.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it's very deep analysis, by the way. And I think that Saakashvili is not thinking about Ukraine, definitely. I'm sorry for such a comment.
Thanks for us.
Right,
yeah. So thanks a lot for explaining and also, catching with the news of today. Really appreciate that you've been with us and explained that to our audience. And I'll be back in a second. Atlantic Council Information Defense Fellow Ben Nemo came under attack by robots on Twitter. The automated bots flooded his account with retweets and later made several strange declarations about him. In the internet age, it was a campaign of harassment. But the attack allowed Nemo to better understand how this networks of propaganda bot works. Ben Nemo spoke with my colleague Matt Kupfer about what he learned and how to identify bots online.
In this context, a bot is a Twitter account which appears to be run by a computer program rather than a human being. So it will post stuff without anybody being there to press the keys. It's a bit like an aeroplane flying on autopilot. It just posts stuff without human intervention. A botnet is a network of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of accounts which all do the same thing and which can be programmed to do the same thing at the same time. So what we saw on this occasion was that the botnet appeared, and this probably had about 90,000 accounts in it, so it was a large network, and it seemed to have been programmed to react to certain words. And if those words were posted in a combination, then everybody in the botnet would retweet that post. Well, I was targeted in this. As soon as I made the post, my notifications on my Twitter page were flooded by literally hundreds of new retweets every second. So effectively, I couldn't use my notifications the way I normally would. So it's a form of harassment. It's using very large networks of automated accounts to basically to spam the people that they're targeting.
Interesting. So let's back up here a little bit to get some context on why this happened. Last week, you and your fellow researchers discovered how pro-Russian bots and botnets were reacting to the protests and subsequent terrorist attack in Charlottesville, Virginia. What did you see there?
Well, what we saw to start with was the way there was a particular narrative which was used by far-right commentators and what seemed to be far-right botnets in the US, which was the narrative that American politicians were condemning the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, but at the same time they were, and I quote, supporting the neo-Nazis in Kyiv. Now, that was a strange kind of thing to be hearing from the far right in the United States, but it's something we've been hearing ever since March 2014 from the Kremlin and from the Kremlin propaganda machine. So what we started looking at was the way this narrative of Ukrainian Nazis and American Nazis had spread from the Kremlin into far-right commentators in the United States. As part of that, we identified a few fake accounts, a few bots which were amplifying the message. Our report was then picked up by an American news outlet called ProPublica, and then ProPublica on Twitter got attacked by a big botnet. And so because they'd been quoting our research, they contacted us and asked us to look at what we could identify about the botnet. And we looked at it and we realized that the botnet was the same one which had been used at the end of at the end of July this year to target a journalist called Julia Davis who had been tweeting about the Russian shelling of Ukraine. And so we recognized that this was a botnet which in the past had been used to attack somebody who was tweeting about Russia.
And what do you think the purpose of these bots was, in your opinion, and how, I mean, the greater purpose, and how effective were they at achieving that goal?
It looks like the purpose was intimidation. It's the people who run the botnet saying, look how many of us there are, look how powerful we are, which is something you often hear from people who run this kind of network. And so looking at all different tweets which attacked, we worked out what the keywords were. And we worked out that if you tweeted a certain combination of words, that would trigger this botnet, and the botnet would start retweeting you. So what we then did was write another tweet with those keywords, but including the address of the Twitter support team. And the botnet started retweeting that tweet. And so effectively, every single bot account which retweeted that tweet was also identifying itself to the Twitter support network. So the result has been that yesterday evening, that tweet that we posted had 86,000 retweets. By this morning, it was down to 35,000 because more than 50,000 bots had been identified and taken off air. So actually, the result has been that by using the botnet in this way, the people who run the botnet have lost quite a lot of their bots.
So that's very effective. Let's just take a look quickly at the attack on you and the Atlantic Council earlier this week. There were some very colorful, I would say, events in the course of that attack. Could you describe a few of them for us?
Okay, so the main events were about halfway through this cycle of intimidation. Somebody, and we don't know who the user was, but somebody created a couple of fake Twitter accounts. One of them stole my image from my Twitter account, but it wasn't trying to impersonate me. It was just trying to mock me. It was claiming that I'm paid by the FSB and that I work for the Kremlin, and it was silly. And that was simply somebody playing a game. But then they also created an account which was an exact mirror of my boss. And they got that account to tweet the news that I was dead. And that was quite a lot darker, and something which clearly they'd taken more time over. Now, because it was an impersonation account, it didn't last very long. It was very obviously an account which was trying to fool people. It was trying to pretend to be my boss. So that was a darker tone to it. But again, that tweet didn't last very long. It was deleted within, or the account was taken down within a couple of hours. So it was a short-term impact.
Are there any other takeaways from this bot attack? Anything that you or we could learn from it?
Not all bots are the same style. Some are better disguised than others. But certainly the simpler ones, any Twitter user can have a look, and if they know the tricks, they can identify a bot. I mean, for example, for me, the three classic indicators are activity, anonymity, and amplification. I think of them as the 3 A's. And all you need to do, for example, for the activity, you look at the date when the account was created, and you look at the number of tweets it's posted. And so you can work out from those two numbers how many times a day is it posting. And there are bot accounts out there which I know which are posting 800 or 1,000 times a day. That's just not a human behavior pattern. So all you need to do is compare those two numbers, and some of the bots you will spot. You can look at the anonymity. You can look at if they've got any kind of identifying features. If they haven't, you might well be looking at a fake account. And then you look at the way they amplify messaging. You can look at how many of their posts are retweets. And again, there are bots out there which I know that post 1,000 times a day, and all those posts are retweets. And so if an account is posting that often, it doesn't give any personal information, and all it's doing is retweeting other accounts, then it's obviously a bot which has been created to retweet people.
Thank you from the entire team of Hromadske International. We are here to explain Ukraine and Eastern Europe for you. And follow us on our social network, Twitter and Facebook, search Hromadske International. We are there 24/7. And goodbye.